Me timata au pēnei. Ka tangi te kawe a waiho kia tangi ana. Ka tangi te wharaura waiho kia tangi ana. E tatari atu ana kia aroaro mahana kataka mai te ahuru koia. That karakia is a symbolism of this period of time that relates to the star atutahi, te tai o atutahi. And it symbols when the heralding of the long-tailed cuckoo and the white-breasted cuckoo are heard, let them sing. For it is a time that they have been waiting for the warmer period to arrive to enable us to prepare our gardens to start the new journey. Koia. Nō reira, e ngā rauranga tira mā, e haramai nei ki roti o koutou whare, te whare pare mata o Aotearoa New Zealand. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your space, to your house, Parliament of New Zealand, of Aotearoa. Tuarua, me mehi kātika ki a rātau kua riro atu rā ki te pō. Koutou e kawea mai rai o koutou mate i tangi mō tētea a mō rātau kua riro atu rā ki tua whakere. Arā, te reo o aitua i te wiki e pāhuri ake nei, tā tumu te heuheu, kua riro atu rā te ariki, a ki te rātu o taharangi. And for those, secondly, I'd like to acknowledge to those who have lost loved ones recently. And it was a challenging time, and we also share our condolences with you, as we do with the passing of Tā Tumu Te Hiuhiu, the ariki of Ngāti Tū Whareto. Nō reira, ne I koutou keirunga e te hunga wairua, mā kere mai ana te koro waiaroha, kirungi a tātou e whakarau I ka mai nei, tēnei ata. And I ask that for those who are unable to join us, particularly our loved ones, that you cast over us the cloak of aroha, so that we prepare for this wonderful morning. Ne I koutou keirunga, ne I koutou keiraro, maranga, maranga, maranga. Therefore, if you are above or below, we ask you to rise and join with us. Ko tēnei te hikitanga, tu hikitea tu hapainga, tēnei taonga nunui ki te ao marama, to rise and uplift this launch of this great gift that has been presented before us. Hiki te area ki na apa pai ngarangaranga he tatapai o tēnei taonga nei. Rere huru rere a manu rere take I tū ai, keu ai, mani ai, pā aki ai, aere ai tamaki tōna tūha wenua. Ka mate tama te e makai puta kai tua kai waho kai atama okotahi kai tamoko pūrangi ki te whai au ki te ao marama. E rongo whakairi he ki runga turuturu o, uti waka maua kia tīna huie tai kie. And that karakia is a symbolism of a launching of a canoe, but in this case, this is a canoe of knowledge. Nō reira mihi rawa atura ki o koutou kei ngā kai rangahau, ki te kimi atu rā ngā kōrero ki roto I tēnei taonga. I ruku hia, I kōrero atu rā ki ngā tangata, ara kōrero atu huri rauna I te motu, I kohingi atu rā I o koutou whakaaro, whakairiri mai rā I ona whakaaro ki roto I tēnei taonga nei. And to those behind the scenes who have dedicated much time and research of collating the information here and interviewing many people to enable you to bring and give formation to this taonga tēnā rakotau. Nō reira, me mihi rawa atura kei ngā memo te whare pare mata, kei ngā pāti katoa I tautō katoa tēnei taonga, mō te ao nei. I'd like to special acknowledgement to various members of Parliament from across the sections of the different parties who have gathered here today. Nō reira tēnei, e te taonga. Hiki nā tura ki a rātau kua rukuhi atura ki tō puku. Anara, he nui ngā kai keiroto I whāngai atura te hini ngaro, I whāngai atura te whakaaro, I whāngai atura ki te manaki atura, tō tātou whānau, tō tātou hapori I te ao. So therefore, oh gracious gift, let us delve into the feast that people are about to partake in, the information that is gathered here. so that not only they consume the information that is gathered within this taonga, but the opportunity to share this knowledge with family and our communities. O reira no tēnei kamihi rawa atura kia koutou. Te kura I huna, te kura I tupua, te kura I tawito, te kura I te kima I Hawaii, ki ka awitia, te nuku ka awitia, te rangi ka tina, ka wena ka toka, te kura ki runga ki te whenua ki runga ki ngā tangata e tau nei, e rongo wakairi hia ki runga, turu o witi wakamaua kia tina, huye. And that karakia is about the unseen knowledge that is hidden within this book, that has been born from out of ancient knowledge to create new knowledge, that have been presented before us here, that is to be shared out unto the land, throughout the country, but most importantly, to the people. Nō reira tēnā koutou, ka huri atu te rākau kōrero, ara ki te tia mana o te puna whakaiti mamai, ara kai whakapiri, nō reira kei tōku rangatira, kei tōku tuakana, nau mai hara mai, kei te tia mana nei, rau paki mai mo tuari pōtiki.
Tēnā rā tātou. Tuatahi me mihi kia koe. E te rangatira mo tō whakatau kia mātou ka tata, mo tō karakia, mai tō karakia kua hangaia te arawhata ki te atua, ki ngā atua mo tātou. Nō reira, ka nui te mihi kia koe. Mo tō haerenga mai, ki te whakamana, ki te whakarangatira tēnei huinga o tātou, e mihi kia koe ki te haukainga no konei hoki, ka nui te mihi, ka nui te mihi, ka nui te mihi hoa. Kia koutou katoa, kua tata, aha koa wai, aha koa no hia tēnā rā tātou. I tautoko ana ka mihi, kia rātou kua whitira ki tia. Tautoko hoki ka mihi kia tātou, ka kaunahi ora tēnā rā tātou. Kia ora, greetings. Great to see everybody here this morning. My name is Tuari, and I have the honour, although it doesn't feel like it sometimes, I still get really anxious, really nervous, and only me and my washing machine know just how nervous I get, but I do end up in these roles quite often, and it's always a privilege and a pleasure, and it's also a bit like hitting yourself on the head with a hammer. It feels so good when you finish. So, welcome. I'll stick with the script because that's, I've learned when all else fails, follow directions. So, emergency exits are signposted and you'll be pointed in the right direction of how to get out if you need to. There's an evacuation assembly point in Bolger Park at the rear of Parliament. Earthquake visitor stickers, keep your stickers on. Wharipaku are out there. Don't smoke. Don't phone. And it's today, Thursday, yeah, there might be bells ringing at different times. It's not your imagination. It's their version of a karanga that they do here when they... So I just want to acknowledge all of the VIPs and the IPs who are in the room. So many of you, particularly the MPs from across the House, Minister Ducey, for your ongoing support. So many sector leaders, too many to mention, too many to name, but a huge mihi atu kia koutou for coming along. And also Val Sim, who is a former law commissioner and who I last saw 16 years ago on a rooftop in Bangkok. Doesn't that sound cool? The story behind it is nowhere as that, but I'm not going to tell you it because I want to leave you guessing. So once again, thanks to the cross-party group for mental health and addiction for hosting the celebration, and just acknowledging the huge effort that's gone into supporting this and the fact that there is a cross-government approach to mental health and addiction. Not everyone on the group's been able to attend, but we have representation, I think, from across all parties today. That group, the cross-party group, was established, I think, in 2019 following the recommendation of Aotearoa, the government inquiry on mental health and addiction. Made up of the following people at the moment: Kahirangi Kata is chair. She's unable to be here, I think, so Chloe's here today to represent Kahirangi. Ingrid Leary from Labour is the deputy chair, but I think she's out of the country, so Phil Twyford's here representing Ingrid. Hana Rafiti Maipi Clark representing Te Pāti Māori. Dr. Vanessa Winink, National Party. Laura McClure, ACT Party, and Jenny Markov, New Zealand First. So the aim of the group is to achieve cross-party dialogue and develop a collective vision and direction for mental health, addiction and wellbeing in Aotearoa New Zealand. And I think we need to be appreciative of the fact that parties, particularly in this environment, are willing to work together to look at some of the issues that we're all facing. So, my first job is to introduce our first speaker, Polo Tupe Solomon Tanoi, from the Michael and Suzanne Boren Foundation, and without whom this report wouldn't and couldn't have been written, so we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. Polo Tupe is Chief Philanthropic Officer at the Michael and Suzanne Boren Foundation, which funds legal research, education and scholarship to improve access to justice in Aotearoa New Zealand. She's a Samoan, Fijian Kiwi and a former diplomat, and is also a storyteller and advocate for a more inclusive society. Polo Tupe, kia ora.
Tātou kua māhue nei, kia ora tātou katoa i ngā āhuatanga o te wā. Aio ki te rangi, aio ki te whenua, aio ki ngā mana, ki ngā reo, ki ngā iwi katoa. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā iwi, e raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi nui ki ngā mana whenua te rohe nei, ati awa, taranaki whānui, Ngāti Toa Rangatira. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. Talofa lava, ni Sambula Vinaka. I would like to acknowledge the Minister for Mental Health, the Honourable Matt Ducey, Members of Parliament, members of the cross-party group of MPs on mental health and addiction, members of the legal profession, the Law Commission, our speakers for today, Professor Kylie Quince and Dave Burnside. Te puna whakaiti pāmamai kai whakapiri, the New Zealand Drug Foundation Board and staff, friends and supporters who are here this morning. My name is Polo Tupe and I'm the Chief Philanthropic Officer of the Michael and Suzanne Boren Foundation. At the Boren Foundation, our vision is for an Aotearoa New Zealand where everyone knows and understands the law and everyone enjoys the protection and opportunity that it provides. We're here to make a difference to the lives of New Zealanders through the law, and we do that by funding legal research, education and scholarship, and supporting change makers. The individuals and organisations like Te Puna Whakaiti, Pāmamai Kai Whakapiri, the New Zealand Drug Foundation, who contribute to our shared vision. The report being launched today, Safer Drug Laws for Aotearoa New Zealand, offers a critical appraisal of the Misuse of Drugs Act to propose an evidence-based approach to drugs and aims to achieve a regulatory system that minimises drug harm in Aotearoa and addresses both the drivers and outcomes of drug-related offending and reoffending. We are proud to have supported this work, which aligns with the Bowen Foundation's vision of an Aotearoa New Zealand that is just, inclusive, tolerant, and free. Congratulations to Sarah, Jacek, Michelle, and the team for all your efforts in bringing these important issues and innovative solutions to light. We hope that this contributes to lifting the public discourse on these matters.
Kia ora kānui, tumihia te kia koe mo tēnā. Now we just have a very brief video from Warren Young, QSO, who many of you hopefully will know, previous Law Commissioner, and was involved in the work that they did looking at the Misuse of Drugs Act a wee while ago. So. Warren's being a bit shy, so we'll come back to him. We'll come back to him shortly. So it's now a pleasure and privilege to introduce Sarah. All of you know Sarah, Executive Director of the Drug Foundation. A whanaunga from Kaitahu, Katimama Waitaha from Otako down home where I'm from. A passionate advocate for the vulnerable within this kaupapa, people who are affected and harmed by drug use and by the laws around drug use. So I'll keep it short and sweet. Over to you. Kia ora.
I ngā mana, i ngā reo, e raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. 50 years ago today, just next door, New Zealand's 37th Parliament went into urgency ahead of its adjournment before the 1975 election. Amongst a flurry of bills, including the Dairy Board Amendment Bill, the Motor Vehicle Dealers Bill and the Meat Amendment Bill number 2, the Misuse of Drugs Bill was unanimously passed into law. It is difficult to imagine that anyone sat in this House 50 years ago today could imagine that what has passed is anything more than a colossal failure. The report that we're releasing today pulls together the evidence on the law's impact, including first-hand testimony from people who have experienced harm. It's a grim story. Across that half-century, acute and chronic drug harms have increased. Fatal overdoses now claim almost 3 lives every week, and a more volatile, toxic drug supply is knocking on our door. The Misuse of Drugs Act and the so-called war on drugs approach that it sits within hasn't prevented these harms. If anything, it's compounded them, while actually outlawing many interventions that could help turn things around. Criminalisation hasn't deterred use, it's deterred help seeking. It's caused And so it has also planted stigma so deeply that people who use drugs hide, hesitate, suffer, or even die alone. For Māori in particular, this law has been devastating. The harms have been sharper, the punishments harsher, and the outcomes more unjust. Over the past year, the situation in New Zealand has become more dire. We have seen a dramatic twofold increase in the consumption of cocaine and methamphetamine, a large growth in convictions, and high levels of overdose fatalities, now including very potent substances like nitazenes. We do not want to end up with a state of chaos that some parts of North America find themselves in today. Yet not only are we tracking in the wrong direction, we're sitting ducks because we have no regulatory levers to pull in the case of an emergency like a mass adulteration or an influx of a change in drugs that changes our use overnight, which actually is what has happened in the last year. It's clear to anyone paying attention, whether you use drugs, whether you're someone who's working to prevent harm or somebody who's completely morally opposed to drug use, our drug laws are unsafe. The status quo is untenable, not only because of what we're experiencing today, but because of what might happen if we don't act now. We cannot arrest our way out of drug harm, we cannot shame our way out of disorder, and we cannot wish away the global black market, which is moving faster than we can respond. So today we invite you all in to hear what the evidence says might help if we really want to reduce drug harm and to be part of a constructive conversation that New Zealanders have long needed us to have. Let's set aside the old tropes and narratives and the division that has left us with a 50-year-old law that's leaving our country vulnerable. This morning I'm very proud to help launch this major new report. In fact, it's a book, we're pretty pleased with it, that sets out how we could build safer drug laws for New Zealand. I want to be very honest with you though. We don't have all the answers. Anyone who says that they have all the solutions is lying. However, at this point, many countries have tried a range of different law reforms, and so we have a wealth of experience and evidence to draw from. So the report sets out what the Misuse of Drugs Act has achieved, the experiences of people who have had harm happen to them, the evidence from many jurisdictions that have reformed their drug laws, and key reflections from Māori drug harm experts. Those bells, you're not imagining it. We then put forward a suite of very well evidenced, we think very pragmatic recommendations that we hope can enable the development of a more responsive law. These reforms that we suggest are not about liberalisation. In fact, they offer the opposite: safety, control, and regulation. We're realistic. We don't expect that these recommendations are going to be picked up and run with on day one, but we hope that they're at the start of a conversation. That's why I'm very pleased to be hosted today by the cross-party group. Today it's my job to outline the report's main findings and recommendations, so I'll get on to it. Firstly, there are 7 principles that we've recommended. The law should have at its core the health and well-being of our people. Principles like reducing the impacts of drug harm, reducing fatalities, reducing substance use disorder. With those principles to guide us, we set out 5 pragmatic, evidence-based recommendations. Firstly, the evidence was clear that decriminalisation, which is the removal of the legal penalties for use or possession, works. Therefore, we propose this as a foundation for change. It might be hard to believe, but if we go back in time to the 70s, the Blake-Palmer Committee, whose work informed the Misuse of Drugs Act, actually were very trepidatious about recommending the criminalisation of drug use. And that's because they were worried that it would get in the way of people seeking help. Well, that has come to pass. Criminalisation causes wide-ranging harms from preventing people seeking help to lifelong impacts of a criminal conviction. Now, the international evidence is actually compelling for decriminalisation. Portugal has 2 decades of experience now providing the strongest case. Following decriminalisation, overdose deaths there fell dramatically, HIV rates plummeted, and of course the burden on the criminal justice system was dramatically reduced, all without an increase in drug use. In 2019, Portugal had among the lowest of the drug death rates in the EU. Now, to date, 34 countries, 36 sub-jurisdictions have decriminalised cannabis use, and 22 countries have decriminalised all drug use. So we now have a spread of countries to draw experience from, as well as Portugal's more long-term evidence. But decriminalisation alone is not a panacea. It can mitigate some of the more harmful effects of our current laws and create conditions for health interventions to work. And certainly the report shows that it offers positive impacts on problematic use in particular. However, one of the biggest factors in Portugal's success was that decriminalisation was coupled with a substantial investment into health support and harm reduction, which is our second recommendation, to redirect resources to health interventions like treatment, harm reduction and support. The communities we engaged with were clear. They do not want to see money being poured into policing low-level crimes while health services remain underfunded. Addiction treatment and community services were repeatedly described as being stretched, inaccessible, sometimes culturally inappropriate. Internationally, where decriminalisation has come to pass and they've failed to invest in these services, the positive impacts have been muted. So based on these findings, we recommend that any law reform effort be accompanied by a deliberate, substantial investment into support, treatment, harm reduction. Our third recommendation is to enable licensing of harm reduction and overdose prevention measures within a responsive public health infrastructure. The constant frustration for those of us who work in harm reduction on the front line is that the Misuse of Drugs Act actually prevents us from doing a number of life-saving measures that would save lives and reduce social and health costs upstream. That we've endured over the last 50 years, the few life rafts that have come have been in the form where New Zealand has taken and prioritised health and harm reduction. So most notable was the establishment, of course, of the Needle Exchange Program in 1988, a move that to this day is responsible for us having one of the lowest HIV rates in the world. More recently, drug checking is offering us a highly effective tool at protecting the community from the chaos of the illicit market. These interventions took years of grinding advocacy and their own extensive legislative process to become a reality. The future that we're all looking at does not have time for that. Instead, we propose a flexible, rapidly responsive regulatory framework overseen by an appropriate health agency that could license harm reduction interventions in response to emerging risks and threats. This agency, whether new or existing, could be empowered to undertake research and make decisions at arm's length with clear, specific goals to improve health outcomes. We also recommend that some interventions be legalised as soon as possible, such as overdose prevention centres, safer utensils and more flexible drug checking regime. Importantly in this section, we also acknowledge that the law as it stands has stood in the way of the therapeutic benefits of some of the substances scheduled within it, and so we recommend the law, any new law that enables the facilitation of psychedelic therapies, of course with patient safety concerns at its core. Our fourth recommendation comes after some very, very careful consideration and concern for what other regulatory measures could be deployed to help, deal with the burgeoning supply issues we face, and what in particular might be necessary in the future. The evidence suggests that commercial models of regulated access can exacerbate harm. And while there's ample international evidence for cannabis regulation models, the evidence is pretty scarce for other substances at this point. That will change over time. Moreover, the thing that's changing incredibly rapidly is our drug supply, and the illicit market is moving very quickly. It's hard to predict what even might be required in our very near future. And so our fourth recommendation is that we empower a health entity with the ability to very carefully develop regulatory supply for some low-harm substances when and if the evidence becomes available, as we anticipate it might, particularly for psychedelics and MDMA, which are covered quite extensively in the report. Moreover, to enable us to adapt if our drug problems call for new approaches. In 2023, I visited Canada, whose overdose fatality rates are some of the highest in the world. On my trip, I met with one of the heads of the British Columbian Police Force, and I asked them if they could go back in time, which in a sense New Zealand is, what would they do? Bless. And they said, in the face of the onslaught of fentanyl fatalities, they wished that they had had a safe supply of heroin to help people from ever having moved on to fentanyl in the first place, something they would never have dreamed of supporting at the time. Now, we haven't recommended that, but it bears emphasising that our future problems could make our current problems pale in comparison. And so a mechanism that enables some future adaptability is important, with careful restrictions to prevent commercial approaches, advertising supply to minors. We also recommend enabling people to grow a small number of cannabis plants, like is allowed in ACT Australia very successfully, and to consider the creation of regulated non-profit associations, which have been successfully tried in countries like Malta, Uruguay, which allows registered clubs to enable adults to share some cannabis between them. Lastly, we listened very carefully to Māori leaders in our sector who told us about the damage the Misuse of Drugs Act has done to Māori. They also told us of their concerns that both any new approaches could leave Māori behind or, worse, exacerbate problems for Māori. This has been the case in other jurisdictions for Indigenous people. So there's more work to be done throughout any process that we would be lucky enough to have to make sure this doesn't come to pass. But for Māori, we're recommending that given we've been the most negatively group impacted by the law and drug harm, that there is a ring-fenced portion of funding to empower whānau hapu and iwi to design and deliver their own solutions, and that tino rangatiratanga over our taonga fungi species be recognised. For those of us who have teenage children in the room, the future looks pretty terrifying. Communities that are drowning under the pressure of increased drug consumption deserve better answers than the ones that have been dragged out repeatedly for the last 50 years of failure. I have no doubt that if action isn't taken in these great halls, we will be back here in shock at what has happened in the decade that awaits us. But today we offer careful, evidence-based proposals for you to consider, and genuinely in an effort to make New Zealand's drug laws safer. And we're willing to work with pretty much anyone on pretty much any of this within the parameters of which we're allowed to. Kia ora, thank you very much.
Amazing, amazing. Kia ora, he mihi atu, he mihi atu. I have it on good authority that Warren has taken some medicine, found his voice. So we're going to have another go now. Kia ora.
So I'm Warren Young. I was many years ago a law commissioner, and I had the great pleasure with my colleague Val Sim of reviewing the Misuse of Drugs Act, which at that stage was more than 30 years old. Now, unfortunately, is nearly 50 years old. And when we did the review of the Misuse of Drugs Act in the Law Commission, it was quite an exciting time in the sense there was a lot of support for what we were doing, and I think a degree of optimism that actually there was a political will to do something. However, as often happens in many areas of legislation, and drug law reform maybe more than most, our report largely fell on fallow grounds. What we ought to be doing is accepting that drugs are around and we effectively manage the health risks that go with them. The policy we have at the moment does not effectively manage health risks, and that's where the focus should lie. If you compare the approach we've taken to tobacco with the approach we've taken to methamphetamine, for example, then at the moment methamphetamine use is going like that at an exponential rate, tobacco use is going like that. Which one's criminalised? You know, and that to me indicates that the approach we've been taking is a manifest failure. And if I had, my biggest concern around drugs would be the impact of methamphetamine on communities all over the country, and we are not managing that. I applaud the Drug Foundation for doing this report, and also the Michael and Suzanne Boren Foundation for funding it. It's really great. And I do hope that people take it seriously. This is not an area that should be the subject of, political game playing. It's actually a health issue that deserves serious attention, and I really hope that politicians on all sides of the House can get together and say, we really need to do something to solve this. Because over the years, I have many times had people talking to me or contacting me when I've had various sorts of jobs from around the country saying, in relation to methamphetamine, please help us. And nobody's helping.
Kia ora. So it's now my privilege to introduce Dave Burnside, who's going to give voice to the lived experience, voices that are in the report. So Dave comes from a lived experience, mental health distress, addiction, homelessness and incarceration, and has been in active recovery for 17 years. He's been with Odyssey Auckland since 2012 and currently is in the role of lived experience lead, which sees him supporting the development of peer and lived experience workforce through advocacy, training, delivery and social recovery model approaches. He's also involved in solution-focused justice research and passionate about human rights and social justice. Dave.
Tēnā rā tātou, g'day. Yes, I'm Dave Burnside and I'm the lived experience lead at Odyssey in Auckland, and I'm a survivor of a war. You know, the war on drugs, and it still rages today. And let's not forget there are many who haven't survived that war, many casualties. So my first conviction, coincidentally, was 50 years ago, 1975, for a minor cannabis matter. The same year the Misuse of Drugs Act was enacted. And that came to define my life. You know, it was a big deal back then. And I became marginalised, labelled, judged by my community, and became embedded in antisocial criminal networks, gangs, and ultimately spent years in jails. And there are people who would say, well, you broke the law. That was the rules. There were consequences. You know, my response to that would be, how dare you? How dare you take away my freedom, my right, my ability to be part of my family, contribute to my community? How dare you? My story is just a drop in the bucket compared to the stories of thousands, hundreds of thousands here in New Zealand and millions around the world who still encounter that today. So, the harms of prohibition really only serve to divide families and communities and deprive people of their rights, roles and responsibilities in life. This report is a wonderful, powerful indictment of prohibition, but also a way forward. It's a call for change. It's a call for flexible, responsible regulation and legislation. I read the voices in this report of lived experience and they speak to my heart. I hear them, I feel them, and I really connect with them. So I'm just going to share a couple of comments that I've picked out that really smacked me in the face. You know, illegality makes help inaccessible. You know, like as a heroin addict in the 1970s, calling for help wasn't an option and people were dying, and they're still dying today. Another one, being forced into an underground society makes us feel as if we are other and not part of our community. I felt like that most of my life. You know, current drug laws perpetuate the problem. When I read these comments, I'm really moved. You know, I think they're so well put in this report. And I think back immediately when I'm reading this stuff, I think back to the boys' homes, the Borstals, the prisons, the institutions, and not just my own experience, but the people that were with me, that walked those journeys. We were Māori, we were Pākehā, we were Pacifica, we were other, and you know, and together we were lost. You know, forgotten, often reviled, and we became ghosts. So I hear the voices in this report, and I add my voice to them, and the voices of many others, as a call for change, a call for a better way, a call for justice. Justice with, not justice to, by the way. So one thing's certain, yeah, we can't arrest our way to, we'll just arrest our way to safer communities. I really want to thank the Drug Foundation. Sarah, that was wonderful, and to everyone involved in the report. I think it's a fantastic way forward. I really want to thank the Michael and Suzanne Boren Foundation for their tireless efforts towards a more just, inclusive, tolerant and free New Zealand. And I hope it's actually really encouraging to see the cross-party support. And I hope it continues to receive the support it deserves, because it's about people, it's about communities, it's about saving lives. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, for reminding us that all wars have casualties. It's now my privilege to introduce Professor Kylie Quince. No Ngāpuhi Te Roroa, Ngāti Porou Ngāti Kahungunu. Kylie is the Dean of the School of Law at Auckland University. Oh, sorry, AUT, oops, wrong one. Which has been on staff since 2017. However, prior to that, was Associate Dean Māori at Auckland, the Faculty of Law, for 18 years. Kylie's an expert in criminal law justice, youth justice, Māori legal issues, and is regularly engaged as an expert consultant by government and non-government organisations. Kylie is an intellectual powerhouse, a real crack-up, and always on the go. Get tired just reading her Facebook updates. So without further ado, kia koe, i te tuahine.
Mōrena koutou, ki te whare e tūnei, tēnā koe, ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, tēnā koutou, rauranga tira mā, ngā hau e whākua tai mai nei mō tēnei kaupapa, tēnei te mihi māhana kia koutou. Now, notwithstanding Tuari's introduction, I'm not really sure why I was asked to come and speak today, because after 10 years of serving on the board of the New Zealand Drug Foundation, I was finally paroled into the community at the end of 2024. Presumably, I have been recalled for breach of conditions, so kei koneo. And she'll hate me for saying this, but one of the things I learnt on the way in here today is that our friend Sarah here recently turned 50, the same age as the Misuse of Drugs Act. Now, while she is still looking amazing and is clearly fit for purpose, what we've heard, of course, is that this piece of legislation is not. As He Roia Māori, I come to this kaupapa with two key foci. The first, ensuring that safer drug laws for Aotearoa upholds the protections of the rule of law, and second, that it honours the guarantees embedded into Tiriti o Waitangi. Developing a model law that does both of those things has required a bit of R&R. Not rest and recreation, but reckoning and reimagining. Reimagining our current legislative frameworks and policy settings. Another way to describe that process is to say that our researchers engaged in the what, so what, now what framework, the reflection framework developed by Terry Borton in the 1970s. Now, this model requires an investigation into what has happened. How has the Misuse of Drugs Act operated in the 50 years since its enactment? What did we learn from those experiences, as Dave has spoken to? And finally, what are we going to do now in terms of our future actions? Both Sarah and Dave have already spoken to those questions in describing the operation of MODA and its consequences, both intended and otherwise. Many of the criticisms we make of MODA may be viewed as characteristics of a system that is not upholding the rule of law, where there is unequal enforcement, a lack of transparency, and eroded trust and public confidence. Earlier this year, the New Zealand Law Society produced a report strengthening the rule of law in Aotearoa New Zealand, in which they remind us that these principles exist to ensure that no one is above the law, that our fundamental rights and freedoms are protected, and that social harmony is promoted by improved public confidence in the law and access to justice. In relation to legislation, the rule of law is strengthened when good processes are followed, including developing policy on the basis of strong evidence and consulting relevant stakeholders, including the public. As you've heard from Sarah, this model drug law synthesises best practice based on evidence from global comparators such as Portugal. Importantly, international evidence and ideas need to be adapted to or take account of our local context and obligations. Of particular relevance to us in Aotearoa, of course, is our constitutional touchstone, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and the interplay particularly between the ability of the Crown to operate in the kāwanatanga sphere, to make and enforce good law and policy in relation to the regulation of drugs and illicit substances, whilst acknowledging and actively protecting the rights of Māori in the tino rangatiratanga sphere, the right for us to self-determine, to lead our own responses to drug harms in accordance with our own tikanga, our own models of health and well-being, and, as Sarah has flagged, to participate in any new economic opportunities. Finally, Te Tiriti reiterates the rule of law concern for consistency in providing for oretitanga or equity in Article 3. Most of what we say in this report is nothing new. In fact, some of the then members of this House proposed similar frameworks at the time that MODA was being debated in 1975. J.B. Munro, who was member for Invercargill, observed at the time, quote, that it is not easy to legislate for what is really a social problem. And coming through from all the submissions was the fact that the whole problem of drugs is much more a social problem than a criminal one. We have to recognise, I think, that New Zealand is not yet ready to accept the fact that perhaps there are other ways of trying to cope with some of these problems. For me, our hope is that we are now ready and that there is clear and compelling evidence that a health-based approach is not only safer, as Sarah has described, but also fiscally responsible and also doesn't leave human victims, as Dave has described from the lived experience. I came to this House in 2017 with the New Zealand Drug Foundation to launch our previous model drug law, Whakawātia Te Huarahi. Much of that report informs this latest offering, although much has occurred in the past 8 years, including a global pandemic, a couple of changes of government, and a close-run cannabis referendum. We almost won. In the drug context specifically, there are complex challenges to effective drug laws, as Sarah has flagged, including rapid chemical modification that subverts legal classifications, digital and online markets, resource limitations, and jurisdictional, legal and regulatory gaps. Safer Drug Laws for Aotearoa New Zealand proposes some responses to those challenges to at least ensure that the drug laws themselves are not a source of harm. I can't not have some ngāpuhi input here. In Te Tai Tokerau and in Hokianga specifically, one of our great prophets of the North was our tupuna Āpirahama Taonui. In one of his visions, he foretells the turbulent change and temptations that would be brought to these lands by the settlers. Te rā te taniwhai haere mai ana, ka ona niho he hiriwa he kauda. There is a taniwha coming. Its teeth are made of silver and gold. Taonui goes on to say that when that taniwha arrives, we will see its blinking in the eyes of our grandchildren, and the only remedy is to cloak them in love. Those words may hold the key to our response to safer drug laws and harms caused by drugs and illicit substances. Whether you use the language of health, not handcuffs, or our language of aroha, love and compassion, towards a vision of oranga ake, collective flourishing for all. Kia ora tātou.
Beautiful. I'd now like to invite the members of the cross-party group, or those who are here to represent ones who couldn't be here, to come up and receive the report. We've got 5 minutes for this next bit, so either someone can speak on behalf of the group for 5 minutes, or 1 minute each. Kaya koutou te tikanga. Kia ora.
Nei te huna ngā kōrero, ke here ngā kura, ke here ngā kōrero, ke here ngā tangata. E rongo whakairi he ki runga turuturu o ki waka maua kia tīnā, tīnā, uye, tāra.
Yeah, I'll hold this. Oh, you can hold that. Take it as read. Morena hoa ma, morena I te whānau. My name is Chloe Swarbrick, and I have the honour and privilege of being one of the founding co-founders of the cross-party group on mental health and addiction wellbeing, alongside the Honourable Matt Ducey, and indeed Jenny Marcroft. And we have here also representatives in the form of Vanessa Wienick and Phil, I'm not going to say your middle name, Twyford. You can Google it, it's a lot of fun and very much connected to this kaupapa. Look, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity or stupidity, I'm not sure. I had the honour of being at the 2019 UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna and was absolutely blown away watching the equivalent of Minister of Health after Minister of Health and country leader get up and say in front of the world, things are getting worse, more people are in prison, we have more drug overdoses, all of these things are backsliding and more terrible, we have to keep doing more of what we've always done and we have to do it harder. I think e te whānau, as we can see, unfortunately, the situation is that drugs are winning the war on drugs. So we just wanted to mihi to the Drug Foundation for all of the work that has come with presenting this report. And as has been acknowledged, there is a long whakapapa that has brought us here. There have been successive reports tabled to successive parliaments, all of which have said largely the same thing, unfortunately, that our drug laws are broken. But let's hope that this now does not fall upon deaf ears. Just in closing, I wanted to make the point that we should not lose hope, because despite the fact that we are in quite an awful state of affairs at the moment, there has actually been a huge amount of change, and actually just even the last 2 parliamentary terms. And I wanted to mihi to our friends who are here in the form of Wendy Allison, who I believe is the first person who ever received a New Year's Honours for services to drug harm minimisation, and also to Dr. Fiona Hutton. both of whom had a huge amounts of contribution to our Section 12 drug changes for creating legal drug checking frameworks in this country. Also wanted to acknowledge that we moved quite substantially with our Section 7 changes to entrench police discretion, not anywhere near as good as decriminalisation, and has indeed exposed some of the discrimination at play. But nonetheless, we just wanted to make the point that good things can and do happen when parties decide to work together. So with all of that said, we'll pass it on to the Minister, and on behalf of the Green Party as part of the cross-party group, I'd just like to invite the Minister to announce we will repeal and replace the Frankenstein Misuse of Drugs Act. But perhaps the more cross-partisan basis is that we accept the recommendations and we'll go away and look at these. Thank you so much. Damo.
Kia ora, and thank you. There's a little note here. It says to say publicly that they have 5 minutes, so they can either have one person speak for 5 minutes or do 1 minute each. By telling them that'll help keep them to time. It worked, so perfect. Thank you. So now it's my privilege to introduce Minister Matt Ducey. As you know, Minister Ducey is our first ever Minister for Mental Health, including addictions. Also Associate Minister of Health. He's been an MP for Waimakariri since 2014, and has previously worked in mental health in New Zealand and the UK, worked with youth, worked in harm reduction before returning home. So someone who has skin in the game and understands us, what we do, and what we're all here for. So over to you, Minister. Kia ora.
Morena, good morning everyone. A big thank you to Ari for that introduction, and Sarah and others in the team from the Drug Foundation and the great work that you do. It's lovely to see many familiar faces in the crowd and some new ones as well. Don't you just love coming after Chloe Schwarbrick and that build-up as well? And look, it's probably no surprise this government has no intention of changing the Misuse of Drugs Act this term, but I do want to acknowledge the commitment from the cross-party group to receive this report. I must say, and Chloe touched on it, has been a founding member. She was Louisa Wall at the time, myself, and we had David at first, and then Jenny as well. And boy, you haven't shied away from getting involved in some of the more tougher political issues, as this one here. So I welcome that. Obviously, government bills are not the be-all and end-all when you look at the drawing of Kahurangi Carter's from the Green Party, her members' bill around the Good Samaritan changes from the National Party. We haven't considered that in caucus yet, so we haven't a position on that. But I must say, when you look at the report, and I'm still to take more advice from officials, and knowing from working with Sarah and Ben and others in the team, I think there will be a lot of commonality and common ground around harm reduction. I look in the room and see a few of you who were actually in class with me up the road on the terrace in our mental health and addiction study days when we were a bit younger. And Paul Schroeder was one of our lecturers, and many will know Paul. And he had a saying which always stayed with me is, how do we stop people starting? How do we start people stopping? And how do we keep people stopped? And that has stayed with me right through to this day. And it is something that is embedded in the Harm Reduction Action Plan that we are working with the Drug Foundation at the moment. I'm happy to say that that will go out for consultation in the middle of this month. It is built on the recommendations of the Drug Summit that we had with the Drug Foundation this year in Parliament. And there's been a lot of development work going into that. Ultimately, it will be a chapter in the mental health strategy that is going through at the moment under the Aotearoa Act for the New Zealand health system as well. I do want to acknowledge Dave and others in the room with lived experience. Yesterday I had the privilege of being in Dunedin for the launch of the Peer Support Lived Experience Service in the emergency department at Dunedin Hospital. An emergency department that is under a lot of pressure and does see a lot of people come in with mental health and drug and alcohol issues. So it's great to see those people with lived experience in drugs and alcohol and addiction being able to use their experience in supporting people who come in a time of vulnerability. What we are trying to do, especially when you look at the mental health and addiction ring-fence funding, it'll be $2.8 billion this year. Fair to say there's no shortage of data in the health and addiction system, but it's the ability to grip up the data and use it for informed decisions. But what I wanted to point out is a few things. One, that I was able to access when Canterbury Addiction Services embedded addiction, peer support and lived experience workers within their services, DNAs went down 43%, and actually the number of people seen within 3 weeks increased dramatically to 91% against the national average of 76%. So what I'm pointing to, what I call the silent revolution, peer support lived experience is not new, but I just feel, especially in addictions and mental health, we're getting some real traction and it's making a real difference. And I'm really excited about the voice of lived experience and the difference it can make. 46,000 Kiwis accessed alcohol and other drug services in 2024. What's interesting when you drill down into the data, 37% of those were self-referred. The second highest referrer was the criminal justice sector at 27%. And what we do know is that on a general population of 100,000 Kiwis, around 8 to 10 of them will access services. Why I'm raising that is there was a call for more investment into harm reduction services, which I support. We do need to invest more through the mental health and addiction ring-fence funding, but also for the first time now we've been able to get into the data of that ring-fence funding. And what's interesting, when you compare communities and the investment going in, the variance at times between one community and the other is quite staggering at over 100%. So we can see the inequities now for the first time of how much we're investing in our communities. And I'll just point to you, the stat that I got was investment per head of general population can vary from $20 in one community right through to $80 in a community next door. So it shows we've got a long way to go to address those inequities in funding our harm reduction services and supporting people in their time of need. Once again, a big thank you to the Drug Foundation and the great work and the advocacy they do. I do welcome your openness and candidness and frankness in our meetings, but that's the way we need to be. I do want to acknowledge the cross-party group. I do, in a way, miss those meetings with one Chloe Strawbrick. They were always an interesting time, and so they should be. And I think it's a real opportunity when MPs come together and do find common ground. I've always been of the view with the cross-party group, and I've had to step away now being the minister, but one of the magic components about that group is not necessarily what they do together, although that will form their views. It's when they go back into their individual caucuses and advocate for that shared view of the cross-party. And then ultimately, the more parties we can get lined up in a position, the better the strength of the proposal will be. So Ngā Mihi, thank you very much for the invite to say a few words today, and I look forward to further discussions with you, Sarah and Tuadi, and other members of the Drug Foundation team on the report going forward. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Minister. Thank you for those words. Couldn't agree more about the need for a joined-up approach and how important the cross-party work is in moving this all forward. So, just to finish up, 1975. Heard a bit about 1975. Other things that happened apart from the Meat Amendment Bill number 2, which we all recollect so fondly. Some other things happened. Dame Whanakupa led a land march in 1975 from the far north to here. John Walker became the first person in the world ever to run a sub 3-minute mile. And as Sarah has alluded to, and others, the Misuse of Drugs Act, largely driven by the war on drugs, the rhetoric of the time, became law. I don't usually talk about things that I do, but nearly 10 years ago, I was privileged to speak on behalf of civil society at the United Nations General Assembly special session on the world drug problem, UNGAS. And it's neat that a couple of people are in the room, Ross and the CEO of Aotearoa, who were represented there at the time too. And I began that kōrero by saying, sometimes when we feel threatened, we go to war. And sometimes we go to war against the wrong people. If we decided to wage war against cancer, would we do that by bombing the people who have cancer? That has been and continues to be the consequence, albeit unintended, of the outdated relic that guides how we do drug policy in New Zealand, the 50-year-old Misuse of Drugs Act. We're better than that, and we deserve better than that. I finished that talk at the UN by saying, we also need to remember that the people who use drugs, the people we're all here talking about, are our sons, our daughters, our brothers, and our sisters. And if you stop and think just for a minute on how you would want your son or daughter to be treated or supported if they were using drugs, then the way forward becomes very clear. Safer drug laws for Aotearoa New Zealand. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. I've been asked to close this with a karakia, but I'm not. I'm going to invite you to do that. And I'd just like you to repeat after me. It's actually a poem, a little chant. But I'm just going to share the words. If you just repeat after me. Tiki, 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 tiki. Tiki tō kape. O te kura kōrero. Whangaia ki ngā tangata katoa. Ka whakahauora tō hapori. Tiki tiki hai. Which means go and fetch, go and collect your copy of the book. Whangaia ki ngā tangata katoa. Consume the knowledge so that you can feed the people. Ka whakahauora tia o hapori to empower your communities. Tiki, 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 tiki. Go, go, go and fetch. Hai. No reira tēnei ka mihi rawa atura. Tiki nā atura i o koutou puka puka heitanga mō ngā tangata katoa, mō ngā hapori katoa, tēnā koutou katoa. E rarau mai nei. Kia ora tātou, have a great day whānau.
About what?